It is pretty weird. Yeah. And I think on some level I was also a stage 5 clinger looking back, because like maybe that's how stage 5 clingers are made. Like you like constantly get abandoned throughout your whole life, and like that's like the only thing you have.
I think you could be forgiven for that. I think we're okay with it. But so you were still 17 when this is happening though, because you're not married.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. I was
But
17.
you get married when you're 18.
Yes. So, yeah, and the whole reason we weren't allowed to get married was because they thought my parents would cause an issue at my wedding.
Yep.
But my parents didn't even know that I wanted to get married. So they wound up like they brought us to Big Bear and had us be on watch by these 2 people full time, getting confessionals. They were kind of trying to take me to an outdoor environment because they thought I was psychotic. They were trying to take me like kind of like into the wilderness to like have my mind calm down and like be normal again. And so we did that for like a month, and then I was like, okay, let's go back. Like I kind of was like, all right, what's my punishment? What's going to happen with all this? Like, and so they posted Dallas at a different base, which was just, but not far away. It was the one on L. Ron Hubbard Way, and I was on Hollywood Boulevard.
And you could see him.
I could not. Like, I think that was a little bit part of their plan. And then I worked in the thing that we talked about earlier, which is like the real estate area where I would do like design work and renderings and stuff like that. And basically, I wound up convincing one of the executives that, like, I guess they brought me to the int base one day. Like I had to go and they basically were like, we just want you to hold on a little bit longer before you get married. Because we're just, oh yeah, it was had something to do with like the Lisa McPherson trials. Like that was part of like, you know, because that was going on.
Yeah.
If I had like done something publicly, like it would just be a PR disaster for them, and they felt like it tied in somehow because they're paranoid about absolutely everything. And so they just wanted me to hold on a little bit longer until that was over.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and I was like, well, look, I don't think my parents will even want to come to the wedding. They were in the Sea Org. They understand. So maybe if you'll just let me write them a letter, then it will just not be a problem. And so I like, and they were like, okay, fine, maybe. So I wrote a letter. And it was like, I didn't even say I wanted to get married. I just said that I had a boyfriend, but anyone who had been in the Sea Org knows that if you have a boyfriend, you want to get married. Yeah. So it was kind of like a secret message, like subliminal thing, like where my parents, they wound up looking at it and being like, oh, she probably wants to get married. And they wrote back and they said, oh, we're happy for you that you met someone. We don't have to come to the wedding. Like they kind of did the math on it probably. Yes. Yeah. So, and so when they wrote back, they basically kind of were like, had their tail between their legs. They're like, they had made this problem go on for years. And they were like, showed me the letter and they're like, so are you just going to like go get married today? Oh, no. So at that previous meeting though, I said, okay, fine. I'll wait a little bit longer if you bring Dallas back to the base where I'm at.
There you go.
So they did it. And then when the letter came back, they were like, oh, so you're going to go get married today? And I was like, yes. And then so
where'd you guys get married?
So we didn't have a wedding. It was very hard to get approval to even go down to the courthouse. Like they made it hell, but they finally approved it, and we had like 2 hours off. And like Dallas had a old ass red truck, and when we didn't have enough money for gas, so on the way there we had to get gas, and we only had put like $5 in. And the key to the ignition was the same as the key to the gas tank, and it broke off in the gas tank, and the gas, like, you know what I mean. And it so we put the gas in. We managed to fish that out. I seriously put the half of the key into the ignition, and put the broken part and turned it, and we went to the courthouse. And
we really wanted to get married. Good for you.
Well, we were kind of like, is this a sign? And I was like, at that point, I was like, it was good enough reason just to shove it in their face to get married. To get married. So, anyway, sorry.
No, it's all good.
The psycho.
It's all not at all. I get it.
Yeah. So we got married at the courthouse, and then went back to work, and then that evening.
The same day you just go back to work. Get married, go to
Oh,
work.
yeah, totally. Well, so in order to be officially married, you do have to have like a little ceremony where the minister signs it. So his family came up from San Diego and we got off post. Well, we got a break from our jobs at midnight and we went to the Celebrity Center and his family was there and I was still wearing my uniform and I worked in the design office and I made design boards. So I used spray glue to like to make the design boards and it was like all caked on my shoes. I looked like a psycho and he was in his uniform and we went there at midnight and then his dad, like, cause he was a minister in Scientology, he did the ceremony on us and then so we were married and then we went back to post. So like none of my family was there. There weren't any pictures. There wasn't any like wedding dress or food or anything. It was just like 30 minutes and like my best friend was there and another friend of mine. They were also in their uniforms. And then
Your best friend from the Sea Org or just...
Yeah, at that time. Yeah. Yeah. And then we went back to post because at that time, like we were working on evolutions that like honestly we were required to stay up all night and sleep under our desks for like 2 hours and then get back to work. So we were like working through the night many nights in a row. So we just like went right back to our jobs right after that.
When you were getting married, like in the actual ceremony though, were you happy?
I was like relieved and I was like, it was also kind of weird because his family was there and they were all like, they were Scientologists, but they were like, it must have looked crazy to them, you know? And they were like, had like their babies there and they were like, yeah, I guess I was just like, I guess I was happy that it was finally getting done and it like the ceremony did mean a lot to me. Like I wanted, like, you know, it talks about like, honestly, I don't even remember what it talks about. Like, I guess in Scientology, they have this triangle and they talk about it in the ceremony. It's the ARC triangle and it's affinity, reality, and communication. And all those three things add up to understanding. And it talks about like, you know, and it talks about not going to bed when you're upset with each other. And yeah, like I guess it was like I finally accomplished this and I won and I could be with somebody who I loved, but there were like little fissures in our relationship already.
Already at that point.
Well, because he told on us.
Yeah.
And continued to do so because of the threat of never being able to talk to his family again, which was something that was very important to him in contrast to how I felt about my family at that time.
Very different.
So I couldn't understand it.
But he also experiences his family.
Exactly. He grew up in a house with his family. He went to school. They took care of him. And so that was always kind of a through line, even when we left Scientology, because his parents were still in Scientology and they saw me as somebody who was keeping him out of Scientology. So I was like the devil.
Yeah.
And him having to choose between his family and me constantly just wound up just like kind of, you know, leading to the eventual demise. But I mean, it's not really a demise if you're married for 22 years. Like it still can be a successful relationship.
Yeah, I understand.
But yeah, that's
had kids too. It's a great thing.
Right.
We'll get there.
Yeah, yeah.
But so you get married in like 2002. You're 18, right?
Yes.
Something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't leave till 2005.
Right, the end of 2005, like November.
Okay. So after you got married, what was the build-up to 2005 with you leaving? Like, how did it happen? Were there specific things you witnessed that suddenly like made it click? Because I asked that because it is very clear that at this point you at least fully subconsciously know this place is really fucked up and I would prefer not to be here, but you almost like haven't admitted that fact out aloud to yourself.
That's
Is that
right.
fair to say?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the base that I was at, you know, it became where we were staying up all night to do these evolutions for things that had to get done to meet deadlines. It became like, you know, things became increasingly like people were getting treated worse and worse. And they started enforcing rules for the sake of rules. Like they weren't even things that were L. Ron Hubbard policies. And because I was now to a point where I was kind of like seeing things for how they were, I was like kind of like, I couldn't unsee it a little bit.
Yep.
Like I was like, I'm here because I care about people and I want to make the world a better place and I want to help people. And everyone in my life, like I knew my parents weren't suppressive people. There were other people who I knew who got declared suppressive people who I'd known my whole life. And I was like, they're not suppressive people. I know. I don't care what you say.
So you're starting to reason for yourself
Yeah.
effectively.
Right. Yeah. And I started to see that the people around me who I cared about were being treated terribly. And I was like, why would I care about helping some strangers out in the world who I don't even know when my friends are getting treated like garbage and being put on the RPF or being declared suppressive people, which is the worst thing you can be declared. Like I was like, why would I care about some strangers when all the things that I can see with my own eyes are not, those people aren't being helped. And I guess I kind of started to believe only what I could see with my eyes, or started to actually believe what I saw with my eyes. Yeah. And then there was a period that me and Dallas were sent to Australia as part of a mission to get a new building for a church out there. But it was really like, they were really just like trying to get rid of us. It was like this, we were sent to Canberra, Australia, which was like the smallest failing Scientology organization. And
where is that like relative to Sydney? Anywhere near it?
It's a couple hours away, but it's actually the capital of Australia, but nothing is there. Like anybody in Australia would be like, oh yeah, Canberra, like nothing happens there.
Like inland from Sydney?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And we were sent there because I kind of became more and more like problematic. Like I started like butting heads. Like they would come into the office and be like, you know, you have to turn off the music because, and I'd be like, why? Because it's against the rules to enjoy anything. And like, you know, they were trying to like take away, like, so some people had eventually gotten cell phones because it like, that's where technology was going. And then they tried to take away everyone's cell phone. And I was like, well, no, I'm not giving away mine. Like, try to take it from me. Like, what policy? And so I guess I became, or when they would try to make us stay up night after night, all the time, always, I was like, no, I'm going to sleep. I was like, who's coming with me? No one came with me ever. Nobody ever.
Because their last name is not Miscavige.
But not only,
Miscavige.
That's true, but I wasn't doing it. Like, I guess that makes me look like a jerk. Like I felt like I could do that because I was Miscavige. But no, I got in trouble for it too. And I was willing to have those people's backs. And in private, they would tell me like, oh, I'm not giving up my cell phone, or, oh, I'm not staying up either. I mean, I was right. They should not have been made to stay up all night. So whether it was because my name was Miscavige or not, like I was right and we should have been able to sleep. And I don't feel bad about going home and telling everyone that they should have gone home. And really, like, when people would get in trouble for certain things, being like they would go to the harshest punishment for them. And I'd be like, well, what about training them for their job? You never did that. You don't even let them to do their job training because they're staying up all night. And so I was just like calling things out and being obnoxious. And like, so I think they were just trying to get rid of me. And so they sent us to Australia, and they weren't going to send Dallas with me, but I insisted that he came with me.
Oh, again, even when you're married?
Yeah, they always separate husbands and wives in Scientology. They don't care. So we were there for like a year, and it was clear that they didn't really care if we were getting anything done or not. So I had a little bit of freedom. We were like in the regular world. We had an apartment, and you know, we were meeting Scientologists there, and like one of them who was helping us with our project had a couple kids, and one of them was 2, and we were with her often because we were working together. And we're also like cooking our own food kind of, which we were going to the grocery store, and we interacted with some non-Scientologists, and they were like seemed perfectly normal to me. And I was like,
So you had never really done either of those things?
Yeah, none of them. I never. And also like her little kid was so cute and like adorable and sweet. Like it was the first time that I like had it was the first time I thought about having kids.
Mm.
Like I just like she was so funny and crazy.
Yeah.
And like she was like kind of like my bestie. And like I would like carry her, which was like that's like I think like carrying a baby
Yes.
is like something happens
Absolutely.
if you're a woman, maybe.
Isn't it like there's like an oxytocin release or something like that?
I guess.
There's a hormonal. Yeah, if I got the hormone wrong, correct in the comments, but there is something scientific there. Yeah.
Yeah, especially at that age.
Yes.
Like so I was like probably like 20 at that time. And Dallas always wanted to have kids. He had the idea that the rule that you couldn't have kids as Sea Org members would change, which was really fucking dumb. I was under no delusions that it would change. But I guess also knowing that he had family out, it seemed like there was a possibility that like if we left, we would have somewhere to go.
But they don't want a Thetan like you feeling another Thetan and feeling anything when you do that.
Right, exactly.
Let alone having one.
Exactly. Yeah. So when we finally came back from Australia, like the difference between living that way and like we would even like watch TV a little bit at night. And we had to like confess all that when we came back.
So you hadn't really watched like
No.
real actual live cable TV.
No, we couldn't watch TV. No. I mean, we went to bed at midnight. We weren't allowed to have TVs. Like they would get confiscated if anyone ever got one.
Had you ever used like a computer or the internet?
So the internet was in a locked room at the end of a hall, and it had all this software on it that blocked any anti-Scientology sites or words or anything. And you had to get special approval from different people in order to use it, and you could only use it for your job. And so when we were in Australia, I actually like was in touch with my parents at that point. Like we would call them because we had an apartment that had a landline. And so I was actually able to talk to them a little bit. And even once, like, we went to this anti-Scientology site that my parents had mentioned, but they mentioned everything carefully. They never said anything like outright.
On the phone when you talk with them.
Well, they were like, oh, check out this site, you know, but they weren't like Scientology's evil and
right, yeah.
You're in a cult, because I would have just shut them down. So it's like you have to be so sensitive.
Subtle, absolutely.
Yeah. And like I think most importantly, you have to show them, like you have to not be the enemy. You have to be the place where they feel like they can always go to when shit goes down or when they want to leave. So just like being nice and loving is maybe more important than what you say about the cult.
Mm-hmm.
Just if you're the first person they think of when they have enough seeds planted that they eventually want to leave, you know, maybe you'd be the person that they would go to. So they like maybe mentioned the site, but didn't tell us what to think about it. And then maybe told me one or two things that I knew to be true, so my aunt had been declared a suppressive person, and they told me the circumstances surrounding
Shelley.
It was my mom's sister, so her name was Sarah. Yeah,
because Shelley, that was later when she and she wasn't declared suppressive. She just got sent off, right?
Right. Well, she's still in the Sea Org. So she wasn't declared suppressive. Yeah. And so it was like, and they told me other people who had been declared, and I was like, oh, those people aren't suppressive. Like I already knew, and I was already kind of disillusioned. But so when we went back, things were just like starkly different. Like it was like if people were falling asleep when we were listening to an L. Ron Hubbard lecture, they would be made to clean the dumpster outside with a toothbrush. And it was like people were just like getting screamed at in front of the staff meetings, and it was just so bad. And then I,
Can we go back for 1 second?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm going on a roll.
No, that's okay. Just I guess it's like 03, 04, something like that, when you're in Australia?
Yeah, I think it was like 04.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you check out some of these sites, like you were saying, that your mom had pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
What's that like to finally see something written there or in video form, whatever it was, that is peeling back the facade on what has been your entire life? Like, do you immediately take it as, oh my God, yeah, wow, how did I not see this? Or are you like, wait a minute, this can't be true, because it's like your whole life is a lie?
Right. That's a really good question because at the time when I was looking at it, I was kind of like looking at it like don't look directly at it. Like
Don't look into the light.
exactly. Yeah. And it wasn't until later when I had left the Sea Org did those sites make a difference for me, because actually somebody who I knew was posting on them later, when at that time I kind of didn't know what they were talking about. Like they kind of used some terminology that I didn't really understand, but just the fact that there were people out there against Scientology, that I think is what made a difference to me. Like that there was some dissent out there and people who had been in, that made a difference to me. But later on when I saw people who I knew telling stories about people that I knew, then it made a huge difference to me. Yeah. But at that time it was still kind of like I was afraid to look at it directly, and I was just like, but knowing that it was out there was important.
How crazy is that though, that like you're so wired by them, even though you've been pushing back internally a ton and rebelling.
Yeah.
You're so still wired into this that you're, without even knowing what's on the other side of the candelabra right there, you're just naturally making yourself afraid to even look at it. That is so frightening to me that it can go that deep.
It's so true. Yes, that was absolutely the case. And there were other factors. Like I didn't fully know how to use the internet, and then they used their like funny language that I didn't understand. Like, and then, yeah. So there were just a few things that couldn't make me really go all in and look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, when we got back to the base, it was just like, it was almost like I'd been living with some degree of freedom for almost a year now, and it was like a shit show, and everyone was psychotic there. And it was just so obvious that they were doing everything they could to make everyone there miserable, and they did not give a crap about their happiness or their well-being. And I like it was just something that I knew for a fact. Like it was something that was undeniable. And yeah. And then so shortly thereafter I wanted to leave.
Now, how did that go down? And was your husband on board right away, or was that a tough conversation?
So he was on board right away. But so if you want to leave the Sea organization, you're not actually allowed to tell your spouse. It's considered a suppressive act for which you could be declared. But but I did tell him, but he was sort of like, yeah. But he was like, but you get through your stuff. And then once you get through it, like, because before you leave, you have to do a whole interrogation and sign all this crap. And he was like, once you get through all that, then I'll leave. If you get through it, I'll leave with you. And so I was like, okay. So.
Now, that's just leaving the Sea Org. That's not leaving Scientology.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a big deal because of who you are, obviously. Bigger deal.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And they did a few last ditch efforts to like try to give me a post that I would like. And so like
what?
So actually at that time is when I did my auditor training. And the reason I chose to do my auditor training is because at the crux of whether or not Scientology works is auditing. So I felt like it was the only job that I could do that wasn't like, hadn't been twisted by that, like that was only written by L. Ron Hubbard. And that was the way I could see if Scientology really helped people or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Scientology in its purest form. Like all the other jobs were like managing this person, managing this person who manages this person who manages. It was like all like so much red tape and ridiculousness, where I felt like if this didn't work, then it would be undeniable. And so I did my auditor training, and there's just more of the same stuff going on. Like I wound up auditing some people. Like there became new rules. Like people in higher level organizations couldn't be married to people in lower level organizations. And so like I wound up auditing, and I only audited for a month, but I wound up auditing somebody who was not allowed to talk to their wife because of these rules, and was trying to get through this auditing action in order to be able to talk to his wife he was so in love with. And it just became one thing after another. Like everyone was just getting treated like crap. And it didn't work. Like I
Yeah.
didn't wind up being able to teach myself that Scientology actually works or helps people. It was the opposite.
That was the last ditch effort, and it just fell
Yes.
flat.
Yeah. And I was getting confessionals myself, and I wound up like meaning interrogations. And so, and I wound up getting so pissed off in one that I left the room and I had to like fight the auditor and I had to like run down the stairs before they could catch me. And it was just like, and I got in trouble for this, and it was just more out PR. So then they were like, so finally it was time to leave.
I'm sorry, when you say fight, like physically
Yeah, like
get into
physically
it?
fight.
Is it a guy?
It was a woman. But so in Scientology, when you're training to become an auditor, you actually do a course that is all about how to physically force the person to do what you tell them to do. It's called like upper indoctrination training routines. And it's like, in one of the drills that you do is they try everything they can to get away, like everything they can. It's like a whole scene in the classroom when it's happening. Everyone's watching, and you have to be able to. And usually, like when I did, I was twin with this huge guy who's like 6 foot something, and they have to do everything they can to get away. And you learn to basically force them. And so when you're in an auditing session in Scientology, your auditor is trained to not let you leave the room. And you're not allowed to leave the room, and you know that. And so, and there's a camera, and on some level you don't ever try it because you know the rules. But I just was like so fed up. I mean, I had so many more hours of confessionals than anybody else I ever knew. I was just so over everything. I was like, honestly, I think I was just like having a mental break at this time. And I was like, I did not care about the rules anymore. I just like wanted to get the fuck out of there. And like, so I crushed the cans to the e-meter that you hold, because I was like, if I crush them, then she can't do the session. Like, she can't use the e-meter. And she still wouldn't let me leave. I threw my auditing folder up in the air. She still wouldn't let me leave. And we were just like fighting. And I wound up like being able to push her out of the way. I mean, this auditing room was like more of like an eighth the size of this room. It was tiny.
Whoa.
Like, and then I finally got out, and then I was like running to the back stairwell so that I could escape the building. And there was somebody like who, like, just as I pushed open the door on that led to outside, a security guard was just getting there and didn't stop me in time. And I like wound up like screaming like, leave me alone, get the fuck away from me. And they're like they just like knew at that point it was bad PR and someone could call the cops. But then it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm walking around here on the sidewalk now with nowhere to go. Like, who am I going to call? So I always just wound up having to go back.
So you go back into the building after that?
Oh, like where else would I go? I didn't
like
have
everything
a phone.
Normal. Yeah.
Well, I guess I would walk around all day until I like calmed down. And often there would be someone following me, trying to get me to come back. And I didn't have anyone to call, really. I didn't.
Like a teacher-like person, like, hey, come back, that kind of thing?
So at first it would be like an auditor, but then they would enlist my friends to be like, Jenna, please come back. This is good. And I'd be like, hey, stay out of it. They're using you, and I don't want to get angry at you because you have nothing to do with this. So just like, so it just, that went on for a little while. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm leaving. And they wanted me to get an interrogation. And I was like, and in order to get an interrogation, I had to do this other auditing thing. And I refused to do it. I was like, I'm never getting auditing again. I want the fuck out of here. But
who'd you go and tell this to?
It was the people in the Office of Special Affairs and also the RTC representative. Anyways, she was like the most important person on the base. And
was that Mike Rinder's office?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, Mike Rinder handled my routing out directly and was directly involved. I did not know this at the time, but basically when I was like supposed to be getting my interrogation, they were taking my ex-husband aside separately, and he stopped like coming back to the room at night. And I was like, you're still leaving with me, right? And he was like, yeah, well, only if you get through your confessional. But I just like couldn't bring myself to do it. And I was like, And then he sort of like started changing his tune slowly. And I was like, well, who are you talking to? He was like, no one. And then it finally came to a point when they were like this went on for weeks. And then he was like getting weirder and weirder and more cold. And he finally said he wasn't going to come with me. And they were trying to force me into the confessional. I would just stay in my room all day. And then they tried to get me to sign this form that was like, if I ever speak badly about Scientology, then I will pay however many millions of dollars. And I was like, I just like shredded it in her face. I was like, I'm never signing this.
Good for you.
And it was because I was also pissed off at that time that Dallas was starting to act weird. And I knew that they were doing something with him.
They're getting to him.
Yeah. And then so finally I was like, okay, well, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to leave without you. I was going to go to my parents' house. And at this time, I did have my cell phone and I could talk to them. And they like couldn't, like when they said they were going to take it away from me, I said I was going to call the police. And so,
he's threatened to call the cops.
Yeah. I mean, it was all like, I was already in trouble. Like I was already doing the worst things I could do. I don't think that I really believed in Scientology anymore.
Yeah.
Like, so, and most people, they're leaving just the Sea Org. I would think I was like done with all of it. So like Aaron left the year after me. He left the Sea Org just the year after me. We left the Sea Org at the same time. But he continued
Stayed in
with Scientology. Yeah.
Right.
And so,
But you want to break free completely. You're like, I'm done.
Yeah, but it was easier for me because my parents were already out of Scientology.
Yes.
And so so I wanted to be like, okay, all right, I'm going to leave without Dallas. And I was really upset. And I remember I was going to leave the next day and I was crying and we were like hugging and like he gave me one of his sweaters. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to take you to the airport. And then from OSA, the gal was like, no, you can't take her to the airport. You drop her in a cab and say goodbye and that's it. And then,
my God.
Yeah. And then, so to his credit, he was like, well, no, I'm going to take her to the airport. She's my wife. I'm not going to ever see her again. And she was like, absolutely not. And like started acting crazy. And then he was like, no, I'm going to take her to the airport. And then so she wound up like, so he had a car and he like was taking me to the airport. She was like, fine, I'm going to be in the car with you guys. So she was like in the back seat. Yeah. Then we like went to get something to eat. She was there the entire time. He was like dropping me off and saying goodbye. And I was like, and at that time I remembered something like as I was leaving in the airport, like about to get on my flight, I remembered something that someone had said to me, a very senior executive. He was like the third in command of Scientology. He was basically like, you know, like he was like, all we care about is how you're doing. Like Dallas can be thrown to the sharks. And I was like, if I leave, they're basically like, they're going to destroy him. Like he's just going to be in trouble. The only reason he hasn't been RPF'd or anything like that is because they know that I wouldn't let that happen. Yep. And so I basically wound up telling him, I said like, look, I'll stay and I will complete my program and I'll just stay. If you want to stay, then I'll stay with you. And then like it was kind of a tactic at the time because I was like, I knew that all they could say about me was that I wanted to leave. And he kept turning it on me that I was leaving him. And so I was like, fine, I'll stay. Mm-hmm. And then he was like, started crying and basically told me everything that had been happening, that Mike Rinder and this gal from OSA had been interrogating him every single day. And they had been telling him how bad my family was. They have been making him tell everything that I ever said to him, all the things that my parents told me, like about Dave beating people and stuff that was going on at the Imp base. And he basically said like, and if I left with you, they said that I would never speak to my family again. And then so then we like were told, the girl who was there, I was like, okay, we're going to stay. And she was like, no, thank you.
Well, was she listening? Was she hearing this?
So she was there.
She's hearing the whole conversation.
Well, so she was there, and I was like, leave us alone. And then she was like, no, I'm staying right here. And in the airport, I was like, leave me and my husband the fuck alone. Get away.
So
This
then,
is out PR.
yeah.
She goes away. Like, so if the second I started creating a scene, she would take a step away. And so we were able to have this conversation. So but she was calling Dallas the whole time. And I even I took his phone and I broke it in half and threw it in the trash because, and then, so
Don't fuck up, Aaron. She got the biggest balls in this room. Just saying.
That was a long time ago. And so, she was like, I was like, he was like, we want to stay. And she was like, no, thank you. It's like, they were like, so we went back and they were like, no, she can't stay.
She's got to go.
Yes.
We've already decided.
And they tried to separate us again. And he was like, no, I'm not being separated again. This has already happened.
I mean, the emotional turmoil of this is just absurd. I mean, it's unfathomable.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yes.
Yeah. So they tried to separate us again, and they tried
physically,
physically,
security comes in.
Yeah, and I was like, no, you can't separate us, and security was involved. We were in the security office when this was happening, and then we wound up staying at the Travelodge for the night because they wouldn't let us go back into our room and get our stuff to leave. And then when we woke up in the morning from the Travelodge, which we had to get money from my parents to be able to even have money to stay there because we didn't have any money.
Contact with them and tell them what's going on.
Yes, yeah. Okay. And my dad did say at the time, he said, if they don't let you leave, I'll come there and get you. And then, so when we woke up in the morning from the Travelodge and we're like, how are we going to sort this out? There was a whole, basically they were already there. The chief of security of the LA base was there with a U-Haul full of all of our stuff that was in these meticulously packed boxes with an inventory of which box every single thing was in, down to Q-tips and condoms. It was
my God.
It was so weird. And he was basically gave us the U-Haul and was said, Dallas, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you never, ever speak to your family again. And then basically left. After he told me that I was a piece of crap. And I was like, yeah, go fuck yourself.
God, these people are so deep.
Yeah. So then, and then we went down to San Diego to his parents' house. But then when we looked at basically it was paid for us to drive all the way to Virginia where my parents lived. And I didn't even realize that that's where they expected us to go once Dallas was leaving.
Well, your parents are in Virginia now, not Mexico.
Right, yeah. Okay. Sorry, at some point in the middle, they had moved to Mexico.
Quite a change.
Yeah, sorry. Minor detail. Anyways, so they had expected us to go to Virginia and not to San Diego. And so, because Dallas's family were active Scientologists, and so us being in contact with them, made it so they couldn't do Scientology, and they didn't want us to poison the field for them. And so, yeah. So we drove down to San Diego that night, and his mom was really happy to see us. And his dad was kind of oh shit, we're in trouble. Yeah.
But if you guys went down there, his parents, the whole threat was that if he leaves, he's going to be disconnected from them. So had they been warned by Mike Rinder's office or something that you guys were leaving and might be coming and they're supposed to turn you away?
Well, they hadn't been warned because they apparently thought that we were going to Virginia where my parents were. So I think that Mike Rinder and them didn't realize that we would be going to San Diego.
But don't they have to think there's a possibility that you might say, fuck it, we're going to make a break for it? They don't have control over you.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think that they did think that. And I think that Dallas's dad kind of immediately reported it in and was like, what am I supposed to do? And I think they reached out to him as well, because when we returned the U-Haul, they probably saw where it was because they had paid for it and they realized that we were there. And, I didn't know it at the time, but recently these documents that Mike Rinder had from that time, that have kind of recently been made known publicly, they kind of document all the things that they were doing, all the behind the scenes things that they were talking with Dallas about, that they were like having people like scout Dallas's parents' house, and they were like, their car is there, and like, but we'll wait till they leave before we go in and talk to Dallas's parents, and just all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I guess something that should have been like really like climactic, like, oh, we finally left. It's a relief, we're not there anymore. Kind of just, and while it kind of was like that, it was just straight to we were living with Dallas's parents at the time, just like being harassed every night.
Are they being like, but they're being punished for this, right? Because they're letting you stay there.
No, they're trying to convince us 24/7 to go back or to get the confessional that we would have to get in order to be in good standing with Scientology. And we're trying to tell them all the things that happen there, and they either don't believe us or don't care. And they're trying to tell us that, well, if Scientology technology was applied correctly, this would not be happening.
Oh my God.
And it was just so annoying to be being told this by a public Scientologist when I'd been in the Sea Org my whole life. Like, I just like wanted to strangle him the whole time.
Yeah, because he's a pleb compared to you.
Exactly, yeah. And so it was just like so frustrating. And then once again, they were feeling like I was the bad person taking their angel son out of Scientology. And then, they were slowly convincing Dallas to pay the freeloader bill, which basically any course, any studying that you did or auditing you received while in the Sea Org, because you're breaking your billion-year contract, you then have to pay for it, like pay regular prices.
How much was your bill?
So they didn't give it to me right away. And I actually don't remember, because when I saw it, it didn't make any difference to me. I was like, I'm never going to pay that. Like, there was never 1 second where I even remotely considered that I would ever pay that. So maybe if I had considered it, then I would remember, but I just didn't care. So, but in order to remain a Scientologist in good standing who can speak to your family still and do courses, you have to pay it. And they were trying to convince us to pay it. And so so they owned a jewelry store. So we worked there. And then we lived with them. And basically it just amounted to me getting harassed all day and all night by them and they were being called by Scientology all the time, reporting on us, talking to Dallas separately, having him try to convince me to finish my confessionals and so on.
But he was telling them some of the horror stories too, right?
Yeah, he was telling them, yeah. And again, they either didn't believe it or they didn't care. That's what's hard for me to accept now. Like when you hear stories of your son being held in a basement and how badly he was treated, like I don't understand how you can still continue to give money to and defend the organization. But I mean, yeah.
Because they're brainwashed.
For sure. It's just like, so this is a level where it's like, but they lived in the regular world. They were getting paid tons of money. And I can empathize. It's just like when I think of me getting unbrainwashed when I was like born there, I'm like, come on, like,
excuse? Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, and I understand being brainwashed, but we're talking about your son. We're talking about your son here. It's not just something you saw that you didn't like. We're talking about how your child was getting treated. I think that I just have like a little bit of a bitchy attitude about that.
No,
like,
it's perfectly understandable.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so it was just like went on for months and years and
years you're in there.
Yeah. Well, so we moved out of their house like after like 6 months.
But stayed working for them.
I actually got a different job too. So
what'd you do?
I worked at a healthy dog food company. So when we moved to our apartment, we got 2 dogs, and it was kind of like having kids for me. It was like the first time I was able to have our own apartment.
Had you been around pets before?
At the ranch, we had like 8 dogs, and they followed us around everywhere, and it was kind of like, yeah. So I loved dogs, and yeah. So we had 2 little dogs, and just like when I was able to have my own job and get away, but Dallas still worked there, and so he slowly started reading things on the internet more and more, and there were people who we knew that had left, and their stories were kind of like fresh, and he sort of became more and more disillusioned. But before we moved, we actually, like, his dad wind up convincing us to go back to Scientology and get what's called the Committee of Evidence, which is sort of like a court martial. They have like, it's like a little trial, I guess. Yeah. And so it's like a little trial that they do, and they accuse you of all the things that they think you did, and you plead guilty or not guilty. And just like, I was just like, I absolutely hated doing it. Like, I did not want to go there. I was not believing in Scientology at all. So it's like almost like it hurt me physically because I had to do it for Dallas's dad's sake, for Dallas's sake.
Yeah.
And it was just like excruciating. And then, I don't know, there's all these stories like when we were working there, like Dallas got this call in the middle of the day that was like, I'm just a good Samaritan, but I want you to know you're being followed. And your wife has been to the hairdresser, she's been here, and it just, Scientology was following us everywhere we were going. Someone with a police scanner called us who heard them talking to each other to tell us.
Are these hired private investigators who aren't Scientologists, but they're hired by Scientology, or are they private investigators who also happen to be Scientologists?
I think that they're hired by Scientology. Yeah, and I think at first maybe some, like, OSA was looking at Dallas's parents' house to see if we were there.
See, like, I know money's green and I know, capitalism exists and whatever, but these guys can take so many goddamn jobs and they take it with an organization that, I mean, these dudes have brains. They're not in it, so they know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
They take it, I mean, I guess some of these guys do take it with evil people, but they're taking it from an organization that is objectively trying to torture people and ruin their lives. I just think there's a special place in hell for that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And it was just like months after months of this until finally we moved out and got some freedom. I think they tried to declare us suppressive people, and then they did give us a freeloader debt. I don't even remember what it was, but then...
You shredded it?
Yeah. I mean, I was like, but Dallas wanted to pay it. And then it was kind of like for a little bit, I was like living with somebody who I was like, he thinks, like, I was like, if you take our money and you give it to them, like, that's not going to happen. Like, it was just like kind of being back when he was being tricked by them. Anyway, so thankfully he started reading stuff on the internet. He started reading stuff about L. Ron Hubbard when we watched the South Park thing.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Now, what's that like? Were there did you learn things in there that you didn't know?
Yeah, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know any of, I mean, I never heard about Xenu and all that crap when I was in there because I hadn't reached.
You hadn't gotten that. Wow.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, like, I was afraid to watch it because I was like, there's still this lingering thing, like, because they tell you if you learn it before you're ready to, you can, like, die or, like, get cancer or turn crazy or something.
Oh, my God.
And I was like, and then I think so. I tested it on Dallas.
Yeah. He threw him to the
watched
lambs.
it first.
To the wolves.
He deserved it at this point, though.
Oh, my God.
He watched it first, and he was like, oh, my God, you have to watch this. So we watched it, and we were like, oh, my God, like, that's so dumb.
Yeah.
But in the end, like, it was kind of a big deal, but also, like, not that big of a deal because I could see myself believing that at the time, and we believed all sorts of other stuff. So
Prison Planet, all that.
Yeah. It was just like, oh God. And I remember going through a period of time when I was like, okay, I no longer believe this. Now I need to start thinking about all of the things that I'm taking for granted and see what I really think about them.
Yes.
Do I think that I'm a Thetan? And I would just like have to sit with it for a few days and like just like think about it. And this time Dallas was like unbrainwashed, and he was like, okay, no, this is all ridiculous. And L. Ron Hubbard was a con man, and he sort of came around. But his parents were still causing trouble, still trying to separate us. Scientology was putting all this pressure on them. And yeah.
But so you've I want to make sure I'm still understanding this right. I might have missed this. You left the Sea Org,
Mm-hmm.
but you guys are still technically Scientologists. Or he is. Dallas is, I'm sorry.
Well, so what Scientology was putting pressure on Dallas's parents for was to disconnect from us at this point.
Yeah.
Because we were declared suppressive people.
Both of you are.
Yes. Even though they didn't send an issue out because it would be bad PR, we were essentially declared.
Okay.
And they were trying to get them to disconnect from us. And Dallas's parents still felt like they could handle us to be in Scientology. And so they still constantly tried. And then there became a point when, I think it was when it was like there was a biography about Tom Cruise written by Andrew Morton. Yeah.
Yeah, it was unauthorized. Yep.
Right, yeah. And it came out, and in it talked about the RPF, all these things about Scientology separating people from families. And basically from that, Scientology released a statement that said that Scientology loves families, all of this is nonsense, the RPF doesn't exist, and like disconnection doesn't exist. And at the time, I was going through this with Dallas's family, and I was just so pissed off at how arrogantly and blatantly they were lying to everybody. Meanwhile, doing this every day.
That's right.
Trying to make my life even harder than it already was when they could have just left us alone. And so I like wound up like writing this letter to the girl who had written the letter, and like I put it on an anti-Scientology blog, and then it wound up like getting picked up by some media. And I was basically just saying that no, Scientology does disconnect people from their families. Everything they're writing here is bullshit. And yeah, I just kind of like called them out.
And that's a big deal coming from you too, because of who you are.
Right. Yeah. At the time, yes, definitely.
Now, what kind of blowback did you get from them for that?
They mostly tried to. So at that point, they didn't talk to me directly. They just had us followed. And then there was someone in our lives who, we thought was our friend. And it wound up that he was like sort of implanted in our lives by them. It was somebody who we knew in the Sea Org, and he had left. And we let him stay with us because he was having a hard time. But it turned out that he was reporting everything back to them. And
oh my God.
But mostly they were putting pressure on Dallas's parents to disconnect from us, which they had all but succeeded in, like just barely. And then we started going on a few TV shows and like doing interviews, and it was great. But it was also, they kind of wound up turning everything into being about Tom Cruise. Like I would talk to them for like hours, and they'd be like ask me some question about Tom Cruise, and then they'd like soundbite that. And it was also really frustrating, but whatever, like some of the word was getting out there, and it was better than nothing. And then I wound up being on, like I was like recording with Nightline, and Dallas's family somehow found out about this. And then so they were like meeting with Scientology, and they wanted us to not have the Nightline thing going on. They didn't want us to be on Nightline, and they wound up like flying and talking to Dallas's parents, and then flying from wherever they were to San Diego in a helicopter with this two women who were like very senior officials in Scientology, and wanted to meet up with us and convince us not to do it. So we like met with them in a Denny's. At first I said, no, I'm not going to meet with them. Yeah.
They couldn't do a better place than Denny's. Oh my God.
I know. The waiter there was like, what the fuck
is going on?
Yes, exactly. And they were like trying to like show me all these Scientology policies, like about you're acting this way because you've done bad things. And I was like, guys, I don't give a like those policies, like throw them in the trash. They mean nothing to me. Yeah, nothing. And then Dallas's parents were there. Were like, well, they mean something, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm fucking surrounded by crazy people all the time. Oh my God. And so like, I kind of said to them, and they were people who I knew. So I was like, when was the last time you had a day off? And they were like, we don't need time off. We love working very, very hard. And I was like, guys,
I'll
like,
bet
come
you
on.
do.
Yeah. And so they were like, well, what do we need to do to make it so this doesn't happen? And I was like, well, you need to undeclare my Aunt Sarah, like make her not declare a suppressive person. And I was like, and you need to let Sea Org members have time off. And I like made all these ridiculous rules, which they were never going to follow. And they're like, we'll think about it. All right. But don't tell anyone about this meeting.
Good thinking. I'll be at Dateline.
Exactly. Yeah. So when we drove away, the next day we were being followed again. And I was just like, fuck you guys. Like, no, I just like continued with it. I never spoke with them again. So it was like the Nightline thing came out, and then after that came out, like soon after, it was when Anonymous started speaking out about Scientology. There had been some clip of Tom Cruise on the internet, and Scientology tried to get it taken down because it was embarrassing and he was acting psycho. And Anonymous like kind of was like saying that they were going to take down Scientology because of them censoring the internet. And then, I guess, so that was kind of happening at the same time as me speaking out. And there were protests happening like sort of around the world from Anonymous. And then me and two other girls created this site called ex-Scientologykids.com, and it sort of became a forum where people could speak openly about their experiences in Scientology growing up. And yeah, so then at that point I was kind of like an outspoken critic.
At this point, though, are you also, because you're out doing a job, you're out in the real world, you're starting to get used to things. So I'm sure there's some stuff that's a shock. I mean, you and I could be here for like the next week to talk about everything you
I
went
know.
through. We obviously can't. Don't have time today to go through all that. But
Mhm.
like, you're making friends in the real world who have nothing to do with Scientology, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And so coming out though, like I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a bank account.
Oh, that's right.
I was like, I wasn't like, I was still like just trying to act like a normal person. Like I wasn't used to going to the grocery store. I had to learn how to cook. But like, so the few people that I worked with who I would tell a little bit of my story to, like, they were like, "What did you say?" They were like, "That's not normal." And I was like,
No shit, Sherlock.
"Yes," but they were all so like nice
Of course,
and
yeah.
so supportive. And that was something that you didn't experience in Scientology. If you ever said anything bad about anything in Scientology, specifically Scientology, it was like they taught you that you were saying it because you had done something bad. You only said bad things if you had done something bad, and you were trying to make less of the thing you did something bad to by saying how bad it is. I don't even know if that made sense, but you're trying to justify the bad thing you did by belittling the target of the bad thing you did. And so it was like nice to be able to speak openly and to be believed for literally once in my life about something I had experienced. Everything I always said, or anytime I like, it's not like I had parents who I could tell if something bad happened, or anyone who I could really go to. Nobody cared. And so it was like the first time that I was like listened to and met with like empathy and kindness. And that was just like a huge deal to me. Like it just felt like,
Absolutely.
yeah, like being validated. And yeah. And so, and I think that kind of sort of made me calm down from the like hyper over explaining and anxiety of not being believed and trying to fight everything.
Yeah, because you're learning a whole new world too, and you don't know how people are going to react.
Right.
Had your grandparents left by this point too?
No, my grandpa didn't leave until many years later. Like even
2012, maybe?
Yes, about then. And by that time I was like already writing my book.
Yeah, your book came out in 2013, right?
Yes.
So he was out when the book came out.
Yes, but he was still very pro Scientology at the time, and he wasn't talking to me at that time because I was bad. I was a suppressive person.
So he was just out of the Sea Org, but still a Scientologist.
Well, because of who he wasn't welcome in Scientology, but he still mentally believed in Scientology. And that process was harder for him as somebody who like, would have gotten his whole family into Scientology.
Yeah, his whole life.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a lot harder to like back out from when you're that old and you've spent that many years in it and you've gotten that many people into it.
Well, in the meantime, before he gets out, in these years between like 2005 and 2012, you obviously had reconnected with your parents right when you were getting out, but did you get a chance to rebuild your relationship with your parents, maybe your brother, even your aunt?
Yes, there was definitely some time for that, and some of it went great and some of it didn't. Like, I guess I think that like when you set a goal for yourself that you're gonna like rebuild everything and everything's gonna be fine, like you kind of can't ever relive your childhood. Like you actually can't get it back. Like honestly, there's nothing you can do. You can just maybe build something new that is valuable. And so I think that we did that, but we've definitely had our ups and downs and craziness continue. It never ends, but it's definitely better than it was.
Did you have, I mean, we talked about this last night with Aaron, but did you have the emotions come up like resenting them for being born into this and them bringing you into it?
So at first, I did not have anything like that. They helped me get out, and I was extremely grateful, and I understood why they were there and all that. I think that I started to feel a little bit differently about it when I had my own kids.
When was that?
So my son was born in 2009, and so my initial reaction wasn't resentment or anything like that, because my parents were very helpful with my kids and they were involved, but it just like kind of, I guess it became, and you know what, there isn't any resentment until I guess it's hard for me to talk about my story without on some level my mom feeling like I'm insulting her. And it's like kind of like I feel like I go out of my way to not make it personal and to be as kind about it and understanding about it as I can. But it's like, I guess it's her choice if she's going to make it all about her rather than me telling my story. And so that's something that we have struggled with. She's both been supportive and both been like thinking that I'm only trying to drag her, which I'm not trying to do. Like, I want her to be happy. I want her to have a good life. And it's so it's almost the things that happen in the now that make it hard to forgive. The rest I can forgive. I don't care. But yeah, it's the same person that did those things.
Yeah.
And so there are still going to be some of those tendencies. Many of them go away, but it's still the same person. Yeah.
I mean, I think we were saying something similar talking about Aaron's situation last night, but it's like the conscious in her is beating down the subconscious of knowing that like your life doesn't have to turn out the way it did for a long time, if not for her. But then there's like, the motherly instinct, there's like denial with that. And
Right.
that's a human thing. I can't imagine being in that position, but.
Right, exactly. And I haven't been in that position, and I think that, like, I don't know, maybe if I was, I would feel differently. So in the end, I just want my mom to be happy.
Yeah, it's
And
great.
yeah, so yeah.
How's your relationship with your dad?
It's good. Like, I mean, me and my dad were closer growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's not like, exactly the same as, like, I don't know, maybe your relationship is with your dad, not to
Sure.
assume anything,
Sure.
but like, yeah, so it's like decent. Yeah.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.